I have to say may well be simple, but they're true. Until you give your love, there's nothing more that we can do. Love is the opening door. Love is what we came here for. No one could offer you more. Do you know what I mean? Have your eyes really seen? Say it's very hard to leave behind the life we knew. But there's no other way, and now it's really up to you. Love is the key we must turn. Truth is the flame we must burn. Freedom the lesson we must learn. Do you know what I mean? Have your eyes really seen? Love is the opening door. Love is what we came here for. No one could offer you more. Do you know what I mean? Have your eyes really seen? Do you know what I mean? Have your eyes really seen?
I invite you to stand up and say this prayer with me. Holy One, there's so many conflicts in our world and in our lives. There's so many challenges to our communities and to our safety, to our connection with other human beings. Somehow we get a sense from all of your creation that it's really about love, and yet we lose our way. We find ourselves all about trying to dominate and control rather than to cooperate and to love. And yet your gospel is clear. We feel it in our hearts. Teach us to find that opening door of love. And so we pray. Amen.
I'm going to invite you all to sing with us those last two choruses. Love is the key we must turn. Truth is the flame we must burn. Freedom the lesson we must learn. Do you know what we mean? take a moment, greet one another with signs of peace.
If you'd like to join me in reading Psalm 36. Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Your judgments are like the great deep. You save humans and animals alike, O Lord. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. All people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. O continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your salvation to the upright of heart. Now I'll read to you from Matthew 2, verses 13 through 15. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son."
Isn't it amazing that two dreams are the first two things that we get in the story after Jesus' birth? First, there's the dream of the wise men we talked about last week, where they're warned in a dream of Herod's scheme and go home by another way, as James Taylor put it. And then there's this dream where Joseph is visited in a dream. And through dreams, somehow some wisdom is found to not stay where they are, but to flee, to go to Egypt, to be safe. And since we're talking about dreams for the next few weeks, these dreams seem to have something to do with dreams of running, dreams of being chased, dreams of trying to get away. Have you ever had a dream like that? Anybody ever had a dream of you're trying to get away? I used to have those dreams where you were trying to get away, but it felt like you were running in molasses. You ever have that dream? It's like you just couldn't move fast enough. Dreams of running, what are those about? And what is it that we experience in our own process of trying to give birth to the Christ in our lives, as Meister Eckhart suggested we might consider when he said, what difference does it make if Mary gave birth to the Christ in her life, in her time, if we don't give birth to the Christ in our lives, in our time? What do we find ourselves running from in the process of that? And running away can be something that can be very positive sometimes, and sometimes something very negative. I want to talk about a little bit of both of those, but to start things off, let's talk about when we're running away from our own dreams. And this is a song by David Wilcox that speaks to that. It's a song called "Eye of the Hurricane." And somewhere there are some lyrics for this, because I don't know it by heart. They've disappeared. Thank you, sir.
tank is full, the switch is on, the night is warm, the cops are gone. A rocket bike is all her own. It's called a hurricane. She told me once it's quite a ride, shaped so there's this place inside. If you're moving, you can hide, safe behind the rain. She wants to run away, there's nowhere that she can go. There's nowhere the pain won't come again. But she can hide in the pouring rain. She rides the eye of the hurricane. Tell the truth, explain to me how you got this need for speed. She laughed and said it just might be the next best thing to love. But hope was gone, she confessed. When you lay your dreams to rest, you can get what's second best, but it's hard to get enough. She wants to run away, there's nowhere that she can go. There's nowhere the pain won't come again. But she can hide in the pouring rain. She rides the eye of the hurricane. We saw her ride so fast last night, racing by in a flash of light. Riding quick, the street was dark. The shining truck she thought was parked, it blocked her path. It stopped her heart, but not the hurricane. She saw a chance to slip the trap, just the room to pass in back. Then it moved and closed the gap, and she never felt the pain. She wants to run away, there's nowhere that she can go. Nowhere the pain won't come again. But she can hide in the pouring rain. She rides the eye of the hurricane. She rides the eye of the hurricane.
Sometimes in the experience of life, we find ourselves running away from our own dreams of who we feel called to be and what we see ourselves longing to be. And sometimes when that's blocked, it is, like the song says, you can settle for second best, but it's hard to get enough. There's a wonderful book written, I guess probably 10 years ago. His author, I cannot remember, who talked about how often in our sense of calling in life, that what we're called to be and do in life, that often we're just a little too afraid to do that. We're just a little too afraid to put ourselves fully into the dream of who we want to be and who we feel called to be. And so he said often what people will do is they'll find themselves kind of not doing that dream, but getting around someone else who's doing that dream. Being around someone else who's doing what they always felt called to do and be. And then they try to kind of live kind of vicariously through that. He compared it to, the story of Jonah. You remember the story of Jonah and the whale. Jonah feels a calling from God to go to Nineveh and to try to save that city from its own wickedness. And Jonah doesn't want to go. And in that story, Jonah, finally he leaves and he gets on a boat. He gets on a boat on the way to Tarshish. And in the middle of the sea, this big storm comes up and everyone's praying to their gods, but he's down in the belly of the boat. This is before he gets into the belly of the whale. He's kind of hiding out because he knows that what's happening right now to the boat is because he's not doing what he should be doing. His world is becoming totally torn up and turbulent because he's running away from his own calling. He's running away from what he is meant to be and do. Now, whether that calling is, in our lives is, I don't know if this happens to some people that they hear a voice saying, "Go to Nineveh." I've never had that happen. But I do think we feel called sometimes. And maybe this is kind of the way calling happened for Jonah, too, is that there was a sense of hurt or a sense of pain or a sense of connection to the illness in the culture there. And he felt something in him that he knew there was something he could do or say or be that could make that difference. But it was just too much of a risk, too much of he would have to believe in what he thought, and he would have to feel strongly enough to be willing to take the slings and arrows of criticism. And maybe he just didn't feel up to that or was afraid of where that might all go. I think oftentimes we don't follow the calling in our hearts because we just don't know. If we go down that path, if we speak that word, where will it go? We'd rather stay in the convenient paths of what we know. I know if I just kind of say, no big deal, or, I really don't have an opinion. Things can go along as they are, and at least we won't be involved. It's safer to not listen to a calling, you would think. But I wonder how much addiction, how much of a need for stimulation, how much of the avoidance kind of entertaining, titillating stuff that we try to fill our lives with that is ever, never enough to give us what we sense that we need in our lives. I wonder how much of that is trying to fill a void in our own sense of calling and living our life the way we are meant to live it. Addictions, like the addiction for speed, are things that fill us for the moment, but never fill us for long. Satisfaction and pride, healthy pride, always seems to come from the experience of investing our lives into something that has real value and seeing it through, whether it succeeds or not. Harry Chapin once told this story. He said, my grandfather was a painter. He said he painted some great things, but he probably never saw himself as a huge success, and certainly by the world standards was never a big success. But he said, my grandfather said to me once, he said, there's two kinds of tired. He said, there's good tired and there's bad tired. He said, strangely enough, bad tired can be after a day that you won. You did what was expected. You accomplished what was you were in charge of. But at the end of the day, he said, you don't settle easy. Because when you look back, you realize there wasn't really a whole lot of me and my sense of love and investment in that. There was no sense of my own calling in that. He said, good tired can be after a day that you lost. But you fall asleep and rest. And you sleep the sleep of the just because you look back and you realize you were living your dream. You were following your calling. You were giving your gift, yours to give. And even if it failed, even if there was no one to hear, you knew this was your path. Joseph Campbell says, until we get on the path of our bliss, until we begin to follow that calling of our own hearts, we never experience what those who do experience, which is that as we do this, it's almost as if the invisible hands seem to appear. He actually said, I pity the man with no invisible means of support. There's something to this journey that when we follow that which we feel called to be, there's something that shifts inside of us. We live a dream. And we don't settle for second best. We don't settle for the things that are just there to keep us entertained. We don't settle just for the stuff that distracts. Sometimes, when I think of running away or being chased dreams, I recognize these dynamics. I'm running away from me. I'm running away from my true self or calling. But there are other times where in dreams, it's important to run. It's important that we see the running that's happening as something that actually needs to happen. There are times where you need to protect that which is yours to protect, and there's no place where you are to make that happen. Even that idea of protecting that which is trying to be born in me sometimes requires that I create some safe space around it for it to be nurtured. Robert Bly, in his book Iron John, talks about how at midlife for many men, there has to be a place that, like in the medieval times, they talked about they had a walled garden. Out in the fields, there were crops that could be planted that were more resistant to the other forces of nature and to other animals. But there were some plants, some aspects of life that had to be safe to be nurtured. I see this in many people who come to counseling, and they're trying to give birth to something in them that they've never found possible because there's never been a walled garden, a safe encounter where they could allow themselves to fall apart to the point where something new might emerge, where they could let down their defenses, where they could relieve that inner critic enough to face things inside of themselves that they can't face with that critic running all the time. Sometimes we need to run away or find a space like Egypt where we're not known, where the past doesn't follow us, where the threats to that which needs to be born in us can happen. You know, I have this belief that oftentimes this is the case for adolescents as they leave home. Do we have any? Yes, we have a few college students with us today. Have you ever noticed that getting a sense of yourself is really hard to do at home? Sometimes physical distance, just going and staying in a dorm room for a while, or going off to camp when you're younger, is a way to begin to kind of have some distance, to begin to grow a little bit more of that sense of who I am, me, individuated from the family. And sometimes that physical distance is important to developing some more emotional growth within me, to have some character strength, to be able to feel strong enough to be that independent human being that I need to become. It's a part of the journey, isn't it? There are times where we get really stuck. There are times where it feels like the walls begin to close in. And sometimes we need to find some way to recover passion. We need to recover the passion of life. I don't know if you ever feel this way, but the older I get, the more I recognize how easy it would be for me to live the rest of my life in somewhat a kind of paying my dues, putting in my time, checking out. Years ago, I met a man named James Kavanaugh who had written a lot of poetry. He said this to me. He said, the only freedom in life, he said, every life is a prison, is a kind of prison. He said, the only freedom is in living it authentically. In one of his poems, he said, I'm not going anywhere until passion returns and tells me where to go. He says, I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to walk. I'm not going to play. I'm not going to work. I'm not even going to sleep until I can do it with passion. Sometimes it's so easy to habituate to the way we see life. There's a trap there. There's a trap that says, this is all you can be. This is all you get to be. And without a dream that calls to us for some purpose, for some sense of who we're meant to be, and a sense of what we should be about, what we can be about, life can get pretty flat. What are you passionate about? How have you become sedentary in a way that no longer is willing to get up and go to Egypt and protect the child in you that needs to be born? That part that knows what it is needed in the world to change the world. That part of you that you know you have to give, and to give with passion. How long ago do we have to look back to remember a time where we felt that sense of passion? Well, if there's anybody who knows how to talk about passion, it's Bruce Springsteen, and this is my cue for the band. When I think of dreams of running and the need to make a change, to do something, to follow passion, how could we not do this song this morning? Because whether the lyrics will ever be sung in another church service ever again, at least in one church service somewhere on the planet, shouldn't there be someone talking about how we must stay connected to the passion in us, even if that means that we were born to run?
Train. Night we ride through mansions of glory and suicide machines. Strung from cages on a highway 9, chrome wheel fuel injected, stepping out over the line. Oh, baby, this town rips the bones from your back. It's a death trap. It's a suicide rap. We gotta get out while we're young. 'Cause tramps like us, baby, we were born to run. Yes, born to run. When you let me in, I wanna be your friend, wanna guard your dreams and visions. Just wrap your legs around these velvet rims, strap your hands across my engines. Together we can break this trap. We'll once you jump, baby, we'll never look back. Oh, will you walk with me out on the wire? 'Cause babe, I'm just a scared and lonely rider, but I gotta know how it feels. I wanna know if love is wild, girl. I wanna know if love is real.
amusement park rises bold and stark. Kids are huddled on the beach in the mist. I wanna die with you, Wendy, on the streets tonight in an everlasting kiss. Tramps like us, baby, we were born to run. Come on, honey, tramps like us, baby, we were born to run. Come on, Wendy, tramps like us, baby, we were born to run. Oh,
Well, I think we come to our time for offering. We've switched up our order and everything this morning. So we're going to stand together and we're going to sing. And I would like to invite you all to sing Love Will Find You. It's a great song we've done before a lot of times, but it's our offering song as well. So if you have an offering, then bring it forward at this time as we're singing. Let me just make sure I've got that here. There we go.
From a safe distance, you may be so close you can taste the blood.
Good singing. Thanks. I'm going to invite you to have a seat. And so as we come to our time of blessing, I want to let there be just a little bit more time in this time for us to have some time for prayer and meditation. And as we begin that, I want to invite you to consider in your own experience where your running is. Where is your running? Are you running away from? Are you running to something? Sometimes it's both. So there was a woman who was a contemporary of Freud's. Her name was Karen Horney, and she developed an understanding of how we deal with things from childhood. She said we basically develop one of three defensive strategies for dealing with conflict and problems. And the first strategy is to try to always settle things with the other person by kind of putting our needs aside and to focus on pleasing the other person and giving them what they want. That's one way to solve a conflict, is to not worry about your stuff. Try to make the other person's needs be more important. And then there was a second strategy that she said was where I learned to escape the conflict, to run away from the conflict. So rather than stay there in the conflict, let's say I grew up in a family where every time there was a conflict, it just became intractable and nothing ever got resolved. And it was like a big waste of time. And to get sucked into it was a really hard and no-win thing. So I might learn this genius strategy of kind of escaping. I'm just going to try to either escape by going deer in the headlights for the moment or physically try to get away. I'll go get my needs met somewhere else. And then the third strategy was she called moving against, where we learn to stand up and kind of fight for what we believe and what we think and what we need and what we want. And so what is interesting about Karen, and the reason I share Karen Horney's stuff with you today is this. What she believed is that most of our neurotic tendencies came not from these three, but from the overuse of one and the lack of capacity for the others. And she saw that somehow behind her perception of all of the psychiatric patients that she was seeing, that there was a sense that there was one of these defense strategies, these childhood strategies, that was their dominant thing, which had become like if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so people who tend to be moved toward people were always making peace and always keeping other people in their lives happy. But you know, the story would probably end up being a little codependent. I don't really look after my journey. I'm not following my bliss. I'm not looking after my own needs. I'm taking care of everybody else. And you know the joke about codependency is you die, you're about to die, and somebody else's life flashes in front of your eyes. You know that joke. So there's that. So you could see how that could become a problem over time, if that's the only tool you had, right? And then she found that the people who were running away, the people who had learned to move away from the conflict and to escape it, you can see how that would be a really helpful thing at times, to be able to disengage from conflict and recognize this was not going to be solved, right? Many of us have learned to do that with our family members who occupy opposite political positions from us. We've learned just to disengage. I'll go get my need somewhere down the road. We're not going to find a way through this conflict together. And she said, that can be a really important thing to know when and how to do, but if that's the only thing we do, if we're always moving away, then we never learn how to think about what the other person's needs are and how their part may be important. And we never learn how to truly stand in the midst of a conflict and have a good experience of conflict where we stand for what we believe and they stand for what they believe, and we find a way to work things through in direct conflict. And finally, the third, you can see how it is helpful to know that you can stand up for what you want and be strong and learn skills to work through conflict directly. But if that's the only way of going about conflict that you know, which is to stand up for your side, I think people who tend toward having that as their main way of dealing with conflict often find themselves in relationships always getting into polarized scenarios. They can walk into a room where everybody's getting along and they will find people to start a fight. It's their way. And they don't feel like they know what's going on until they know who's on what side. And they know which side to take, right? I share this with you right now here at the end of our celebration. For us to do this, I want to invite you to just take a moment and reflect on just those three. And where in your life do you find yourself moving away, moving toward, or moving against? What's your rhythm in your life? What's the dominant one for you? What's the least experienced? How might finding some balance in those three in your life make a difference? Let's stand. We'll hold each other's hands. Hello. How are you? Okay, I'll just put my hand here. How's this? So let's pray. So I invite you to just, maybe for these moments, to allow a little bit of stillness into your heart. We've been busy with our thoughts this morning. Dreams seem to come from the deep down well of stillness. They emerge when we've got our usual crystallized selves that we're so sure of, sleeping and still. This morning we pay attention. We listen to the soul. Listen to our own hearts. What's the step of growth for each of us this morning? What's the step that takes us further into that passionate calling? Where were we born to run? Where are we running away, where we might find it better to turn and face that which is chasing us? How good are we at listening to the needs in other voices and having compassion for those with whom we find ourselves in conflict? Holy One, we're not perfect. We're all growing. We're all in this journey. Every one of us in this room seeking to find a path that is